In the last couple of videos, we were introduced to the what and the how of web services. In this video, let's revise some of the key terminology that is associated with web services. Request, response, message exchange format. We'll look at what is a service provider, what is a service consumer, what is a service definition, and what is transport. Let's start with request and response. Request is the input to a web service and response is the output from a web service. Message exchange format is the format of the request and the response. Are we using XML? Are we using JSON? What is the format of the request and response? That's basically the message exchange format. The next key terminology is service provider and service consumer. Application A wants to consume a service from the web service which is present in here. The web service here is called a service provider. Service provider is the one which hosts the web service. The service consumer is the one which is consuming the web service. Application A in this example is a consumer of the web service. In this example, the Java application, the .NET application and the PHP application are the consumers of the web service. We looked at service provider, the guy who's providing the service. The service consumer is who is using the service. The next important terminology is service definition. The service definition is the contract between the service provider and the service consumer. The service definition defines what is the format of the request and response, XML or JSON? What is the structure of the request? What is the structure of the response? And where is the service available? That's the endpoint. Endpoint defines what URL the service is exposed at. How can the service consumer call the service which is exposed by the service provider? The other key terminology is transport. Transport defines how a service is called. Is the service exposed over internet? So I'll be given a URL and I'll call it. Or is the service exposed over a queue? Two popular formats are HTTP and MQ. HTTP is basically over the web. Just like you type a URL in the browser, in a similar way, application A would call the web service. The other format is MQ, is to use communication over a queue. The service requester would place a message in the queue. The service provider would be listening on the queue, and as soon as there's a request on the queue, it would take the request, do the processing of it, create the response, and put it back in the queue. And the service requester would get the response from the queue. The transport which is used is MQ. It does not necessarily be WebSphere MQ. It can be any of the other MQs as well. But the fact is the communication happens over queue. This is called a web service which is exposed over the transport MQ. The last key terminology we looked at was transport. Transport indicates whether the service is exposed over a queue or whether it's exposed over the web. That's the internet. Idea behind this video is to provide a quick overview of all the key terminology which is associated with web services. Most of this is what we have discussed in the earlier videos. We wanted to make sure that there is no ambiguity in understanding of these key terminology because we would be using this terminology during the next steps of this course. Until the next video, bye bye.